The judge thought it was just another traffic violation hearing, until the old man in the worn leather jacket quietly said his call sign, and every Marine in the gallery stood at attention. What happened in that courtroom wasn't supposed to be recorded, but the bailiff couldn't stop his hands from shaking as he watched it unfold. The morning had started like any other Tuesday in Judge Marion's district courtroom. A parade of speeding tickets, parking disputes, and the occasional DUI case that made everyone uncomfortable. The air conditioning hummed its usual monotonous song, and the fluorescent lights cast their unflattering glow across tired faces. Waiting for their turn before the bench, Judge Marion, a man who prided himself on running an efficient docket, shuffled through his papers with the practiced indifference of someone who'd seen it all. He hadn't seen this. Before I tell you what changed everything in that room, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening to these stories. The old man who walked through those courtroom doors that morning didn't look like much. His name was Thomas Grant, 72 years old, with silver hair that had thinned at the crown and deep lines etched around his eyes, like canyons carved by decades of sun and wind. He wore faded jeans, scuffed work boots, and a brown leather jacket that had seen better days, the kind of jacket that held stories in every scratch and stain. He moved with a slight limp, favoring his left leg, and when he approached the defendant's table, he placed his hands flat on the wood with a steadiness that suggested old discipline. Never quite leaves the bones. The charge was simple: failure to stop at a red light. The officer who'd pulled him over testified that Grant had rolled through the intersection near the Veterans Cemetery just after dawn, barely slowing down. It was a routine violation, the kind Judge Marion dismissed or fined 50 times a week. But protocol was protocol, and the judge liked his courtroom theater, the small moments where he could inject personality into the bureaucratic machinery. "Mr. Grant," Judge Marion said, leaning back in his chair with the casual authority of a man who owned the room, "I see here you're a veteran. Marine Corps, is that right?" "Yes, Your Honor," Thomas replied, his voice quiet but clear, carrying the kind of resonance that comes from years of giving orders in the wind. Judge Marion smiled, the kind of smile that was meant to be friendly but carried an edge of condescension. He'd done this bit before, asking veterans about their service, making small talk, showing the gallery he cared. It played well with the crowd, made him seem human. "Well, thank you for your service, Mr. Grant. Did you have a call sign back in the day? You pilots always had those colorful nicknames, didn't you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Thomas Grant looked up slowly, meeting the judge's eyes with an expression that was neither hostile nor friendly, just present, deeply present, in a way that made the temperature in the room shift by a degree or two. "Yes, sir," Thomas said. "They called me Hangman." The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. For a moment, nothing happened, just the continued hum of the air conditioning and the shuffling of papers somewhere in the back row. Judge Marion's smile didn't falter, but something in his posture changed, became less certain. He opened his mouth to make another joke, perhaps something about hanging judges or hanging juries, but he never got the chance. In the back of the courtroom, 3 men stood up simultaneously. They weren't together. They'd been scattered across different rows, waiting for their own cases to be called. But they rose as one, their movements synchronized by something older than friendship, older than law. They stood at attention, shoulders back, chins level, eyes forward. One of them had gray in his beard. Another wore a faded USMC cap. The third had tattoos running down both forearms, eagles' anchors, and names Thomas couldn't read from this distance, but understood in his marrow. Then more stood. A woman in her 50s near the side door, a younger man in a suit who'd been scrolling through his phone, a bailiff who wasn't supposed to move from his post. Within seconds, 8 people were standing at attention in that courtroom, and the 9th, the court reporter, had her hand over her mouth, her eyes glistening. Judge Marion's face went through several transformations in the span of 5 seconds. Confusion gave way to dawning realization, which gave way to something that looked uncomfortably like shame. His hand, which had been resting casually on his gavel, slowly withdrew. The smirk that had been playing at the corners of his mouth vanished completely. "Captain Thomas Grant," one of the standing Marines said from the back, his voice steady and formal. "Sir, Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. It's an honor, sir." The judge's eyes darted from face to face, suddenly understanding. that he'd stumbled into something far beyond his jurisdiction. He'd heard of Thomas Grant. Everyone who'd served in certain circles had heard the stories. But the man had been a ghost for decades, living quietly in some small town, never seeking recognition or glory. The name Hangman wasn't some cute nickname earned in a bar or during training exercises. It was a call sign earned in the skies over hostile territory, a name spoken with equal parts respect and awe by anyone who'd flown with him or been saved by him. Thomas had flown 63 combat missions. He'd brought his damaged aircraft home 17 times when everyone else said he should eject. He'd called in strikes that saved entire platoons pinned down in firefights, coordinating air support with a precision that bordered on miraculous. The call sign Hangman came from his reputation for hanging in the fight, long after others would have retreated, staying overhead, burning fuel he couldn't spare, until every last Marine on the ground was safe. He'd been shot down twice, held as a prisoner for months, and still returned to combat the moment he was cleared. He'd earned a Navy Cross to Silver Stars, and more Purple Hearts than he wore on the rare occasions he put on his dress uniform. And here he was, being lectured about a traffic violation by a judge who'd made him the punchline of a joke. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said quietly, standing up with a manila folder in her hands, "I'd like to move to dismiss this case. Officer Hernandez has submitted an amended statement indicating that Mr. Grant was actually stopping to place flowers at a grave site and may have been distracted. Given the circumstances and Mr. Grant's record," she trailed off, letting the weight of what everyone now understood fill the silence. Judge Marion nodded quickly. Motion granted. Case dismissed. His voice had lost all its theatrical flourish. "Mr. Grant, I apologize for my tone. Your service to this country speaks for itself." Thomas Grant stood there for a moment, looking at the judge with those canyon-carved eyes. Then he nodded once, sharp and final, the kind of nod that acknowledged the apology without quite accepting it. He turned to leave, his limp slightly more pronounced now that the adrenaline of standing in front of authority was fading. As he walked down the center aisle, every Marine he passed reached out, not to stop him, but to touch his shoulder briefly, to make contact, to honor the silent language of warriors who recognized their own. The woman with gray in her hair had tears streaming down her face. "My son made it home because of you, Captain," she whispered as he passed. "Fallujah, 2004. You stayed overhead when you should have bugged out. He tells everyone about the crazy pilot who wouldn't leave." Thomas paused, turned to her, and for the first time that morning, his expression softened into something almost like a smile. "What's his name, ma'am?" "Marcus Chen. He's a teacher now. 2 kids. I'm glad he's home," Thomas said simply. Then he continued walking, pushing open the heavy courtroom doors and stepping out into the bright morning sun that painted everything gold. Inside, Judge Marion sat very still at his bench, staring at his gavel as if seeing it for the first time. The bailiff who'd stood at attention slowly returned to his post, but his eyes followed the old man through the window until he disappeared around the corner. The courtroom gradually returned to its usual rhythm. Names called, charges read, judgments rendered, but everyone who'd been there that morning carried something different out with them, a reminder that heroism doesn't announce itself with trumpets and banners. Sometimes it wears scuffed boots and a worn leather jacket, and it answers to a call sign that once meant the difference between life and death for young men fighting in distant deserts. Because respect isn't given, it's earned in moments no one sees, and it follows you like a shadow, even decades after the guns fall silent. And sometimes, in a fluorescent-lit courtroom on a random Tuesday morning, that shadow becomes visible again, and everyone remembers what true service looks like. If this story moved you, drop a comment telling me about a veteran in your life who deserves recognition. And if you believe that respect should be given where it's truly earned, consider subscribing. These are the stories that matter, the ones that remind us who we should be.